You really think that you're untouchable because people buy your little paintings, Jewel?
David's voice cut through the air of the living room like sharp glass. He threw the heavy stack of legal documents onto the marble coffee table with a thud that echoed off the high ceilings. Look at this calendar. 3 months in Paris, 2 months in Tokyo. You left me here like an invisible ghost while you played superstar. That is spousal negligence, honey. And since you were too arrogant to ask for a prenup, half of this house, half of your gallery millions, and half of every canvas you paint for the next 10 years belongs to me. Jewel looked at the man she had loved for 2 years and married for 1, her blood turning to absolute ice. The betrayal was a physical weight crushing her chest, but she kept her chin up, refusing to let a single tear fall in front of him. David took a step closer, his face twisted in a smug, predatory smirk. You're a great artist, Jewel, but without me holding down the fort, you are nothing but an absentee wife. Sign the settlement, or I will drag your name through every media outlet from Miami to New York. Before he could take another step, the heavy oak front door of the estate swung open with a slow, terrifying authority. Min-woo didn't knock. He walked into the room with the rhythmic, unbothered poise of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. The towering Korean mogul adjusted his tailored Italian suit cuff, his dark eyes fixed entirely on David. He didn't raise his voice, yet when he spoke, the temperature in the room plummeted. Get out of this place right now, Min-woo murmured, his voice cutting through David's smugness like a razor. Or I will personally ensure that by Monday morning your scandal will be everywhere for the world to see how shameless you are. The front door clicked shut, the heavy latch sealing out the sudden silence of the Florida evening. David had vanished into the humid night, his smug bravado evaporating the exact second Min-woo's security detail ushered him off the property. For a suspended heartbeat, the living room felt entirely too large, the air thick with the residue of David's venomous threats. Then the invisible armor holding Jewel together completely disintegrated. Her knees buckled. The absolute ice in her veins thawed into a violent, trembling heat as she crashed toward the polished marble floor. But she never hit the ground. Min-woo moved with an urgency that shattered his usual calculated poise, catching her before her knees could strike the stone. He pulled her flush against his chest, wrapping his arms around her like a protective fortress. I've got you, Jewel. Breathe. Just breathe. Min-woo murmured, his deep voice vibrating against her crown as he held her on the floor, his hand buried in her hair. Jewel didn't cry. The shock was too profound for tears, but her fingers clawed into the pristine fabric of his tailored suit jacket, her chest heaving as the raw trauma of the past few hours finally caught up to her. Min-woo had only landed from Seoul 3 hours ago to visit his mother next door. He had seen David's car parked at an odd angle, heard the muffled, aggressive shouting through the estate's high windows, and let himself in through the side gate they had shared as children. For 15 years, Min-woo had been like her big brother, and tonight, that instinct had saved her. As her forehead rested against his shoulder, Jewel's mind violently reeled backward to the parking driveway just 45 minutes ago, tracing the exact genesis of this nightmare. She had just returned early from an exhausting, triumphant European art tour. Her latest abstract collection had completely sold out in Paris, netting millions and cementing her status as a global contemporary icon. She had been sitting right outside the place she and David called home for a year in her car, exhausted but smiling, eager to surprise her husband for their wedding anniversary, which was today. Wanting to hear his voice, she had dialed David from the steering wheel. The line connected, but there was no greeting. Only static, followed by the loose, unbothered laughter she once loved, accompanied by the giggling of another woman. For 10 agonizing minutes, Jewel had sat paralyzed in her dark car, listening to her husband pocket dial her into his betrayal. David was speaking to a junior clerk from his mid-level firm. Jewel could still hear his exact, calculated words echoing in her skull. She was too stupid to ask for a prenup, babe. She's too busy playing superstar in Paris and Tokyo to notice anything. Once my lawyer files for spousal negligence and emotional abandonment because of her flights, half of her gallery fortune and painting copyrights belong to me. She's the perfect target. The contrast was sickening. She had been conquering the international art world, building a generational legacy with her own hands, while the man she loved sat in her house, forensically plotting to rob her of her mind, her money, and her name. "He's going to try to ruin me, Min-woo," Jewel whispered into the dark fabric of his suit, her voice hollow as she pulled back slightly to look into his intense, unreadable eyes. "He recorded my travel dates. He's turning my success into a crime. I don't know what to do. How could I have been so stupid?" Min-woo gently wiped a stray lock of hair from her face, his gaze burning with a cold, protective fury. "He can file whatever papers he wants, Jewel. But he has no idea who is standing behind you." Min-woo's arms tightened around her, his solid presence the only thing anchoring her to reality as the echoes of the confrontation faded. Jewel let her eyes close, the cold marble beneath them matching the absolute numbness spreading through her chest. Her mind spun back to the moments right after that devastating phone call, filling in the blanks of how they had ended up on the floor of her parents' empty living room. 45 minutes ago, when the pocket dial finally went silent, Jewel hadn't screamed. She hadn't stormed into the house she shared with David to demand answers. Her artistic mind, usually so fluid and expressive, had locked into a state of survival logic. She knew that if she walked through that front door in a state of blind fury, David would weaponize her emotions against her. Instead, she had quietly shifted her car into reverse, turned off the headlights, and backed out of the driveway. She drove at a very high speed of 200 kilometers per hour without any destination in mind. And somehow she saw herself pulling into the dark, familiar driveway of her parents' estate. Her parents were out of town, leaving the house completely vacant, a sanctuary of shadows. Jewel had let herself in, sat on the edge of the dust-sheeted sofa in the dark, and stared at her glowing phone screen. With trembling fingers, she typed a single, devastatingly calm message to David. "I heard everything you said to her. Do not pack your things. My lawyers will contact you in the morning for an uncontested divorce." She had expected him to beg. She had expected him to lie. But David's response was immediate, vicious, and loud. 10 minutes later, headlights cut through her parents' living room windows. David hadn't stayed at their house. He had tracked her phone location and stormed into her parents' sanctuary like a man possessed. When he kicked open the front door, there was no remorse in his eyes. Only the terrifying realization that his trap had been sprung too early, and he was pivoting to raw aggression. "You think you can just cast me aside with a text message?" he had roared, throwing his legal folder onto the table. That was the moment the trap revealed its true depth. He hadn't started planning this tonight. He had been quietly collecting her flight logs, international gallery contracts, and bank statements for the last 6 months. Every cold shoulder, every manufactured argument about her always being away, had been a calculated chess move to document a broken home for the courts. Now, sitting on the floor in the quiet aftermath, the sheer scale of his malice washed over her. Her creative triumphs, the long nights in Paris, the early mornings in Tokyo weren't just milestones of her hard work anymore. David had forensically transformed her dreams into a legal crime against her marriage. "Jewel!" Min-woo's voice broke through the suffocating memory, low and steady against her ear. He gently pulled her up from the floor, guiding her to sit on the sofa, though he didn't let go of her hands. His dark eyes locked onto hers with an unshakable, fierce clarity. "Look at me. The chessboard he built over these past months, I'm flipping it over. He at most has a mid-level lawyer. You have most has a mid-level lawyer. You have me, and I promise you he's completely out of his depth." The air inside her parents' house felt heavy, suffocatingly thick with the lingering echo of David's malicious shouting. Min-woo didn't say a word as he gently laced his fingers through Jewel's trembling hand, guiding her away from the shattered piece of the living room. He pushed open the side door, leading her out into the cool, humid Florida night. They walked across the seamless stretch of manicured lawn that connected their family estates, stepping into the quiet, moonlit sanctuary of the shared garden that lay nestled between their homes. The garden hadn't changed. The scent of night-blooming jasmine hung heavy in the air, and the grand weeping willow cast long, protective shadows over the old stone bench where they had spent countless afternoons as children. As Min-woo gently guided her to sit, Jewel felt a sudden profound wave of familiarity wash over her. A striking contrast to the cold, unfamiliar monster her husband had become over the phone just an hour ago. Sitting there under the silver moonlight, the silence between them opened the floodgates of a 15-year history. They had grown up as next-door neighbors, bound together by a quiet understanding that only children from fractured worlds could share. Following a bitter, high-profile divorce, Min-woo's mother had fled the cutthroat societal pressures of Seoul, settling in this quiet corner of Florida to give her son a grounded life. Meanwhile, Min-woo's father had remained in South Korea, fiercely building and ruling the largest, most ruthless corporate law firm in Asia. Min-woo had been groomed from birth to inherit that multi-billion-dollar empire, carrying the heavy weight of an international legacy on his young shoulders, while Jewel had spent her youth painting her soul onto blank canvases in the yard next door. As Jewel looked at Min-woo's profile, his sharp, aristocratic jawline softened only by the deep concern in his eyes. Her mind flashed back to their time at the same prestigious American university. He had been a brilliant, intimidating senior 3 years ahead of her, commanding every room he walked into. Jewel had carried a consuming, burning crush on him back, then a secret love that kept her awake in her dorm room at night. But she had fiercely buried it. Min-woo had always treated her with a strict, disciplined boundary, maintaining a protective distance that broke her heart just a little bit every day. He had been her fiercest defender, but his careful restraint had convinced her that he only saw her as a junior sister, a childhood neighbor. He was obligated to watch over. But as she sat beside him now, feeling the intense protective aura radiating off him, Jewel had no idea of the truth. In reality, Min-woo had been desperately, hopelessly in love with her even then. Every boundary he set, every disciplined step back he took in university, had been an act of ultimate sacrifice. He had known the brutal, treacherous world of his father's legal empire awaited him in Seoul, and he had refused to drag her into the crossfires of his family's corporate wars before he was ready. He had sworn to himself during those long university nights that he would return to Korea, conquer his father's empire, expand it globally, and build a fortress powerful enough to protect her and her artistic genius forever. He had just never expected that while he was away building that empire, a predator like David would slip into her life. The silence of the garden deepened, broken only by the rhythmic hum of distant cicadas and the soft rustle of the willow branches. Surrounded by the heavy, sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine, the final defenses Jewel had spent months building completely crumbled. She looked down at her hands, the silver moonlight catching the faint trace of clay beneath her fingernails, a reminder of the art that had defined her entire life, the very art her husband was now trying to steal. "He didn't just decide to do this tonight, Min-woo," Jewel whispered, her voice cracking as the full weight of David's calculations settled heavily in her chest. "He's been planning this for 6 months. Every single flight I took to Paris. Every gallery contract I signed in Tokyo. He was quietly logging all of it. He copied my bank statements. He even printed out the press releases from my sold-out shows to prove my absence from the home." She let out a hollow, self-deprecating laugh, shaking her head. "He's weaponizing my career. He's taking the proudest moments of my life and turning them into a legal crime. I was just so blind. When David swept me off my feet last year, I thought I was choosing safety. I thought I was choosing a normal, quiet life where I could just create. How could I have been so incredibly stupid?" A heavy tear finally escaped, trailing down her cheek. Jewel expected the typical gentle words of comfort her childhood friend always offered. She expected a soft pat on the shoulder, a reassuring murmur. Instead, the atmosphere between them shifted violently. Min-woo reached out and caught her hands in his. His grip wasn't harsh, but it was unshakable, arresting her spiral into despair. In an instant, the gentle, nostalgic childhood friend persona completely vanished. The warmth in his eyes hardened into something sharp, forensic, and utterly dominant. Min-woo leaned forward, forcing her to look directly into a gaze that had brought multi-billion-dollar boards to their knees in Seoul. When he spoke, his voice didn't rise, but it cut through the humid Florida night with the precise, terrifying edge of a razor blade. "Look at me, Jewel," he commanded, his tone dropping into a low, resonant register that brooked absolute zero argument. "Stop calling yourself stupid for trusting the man you married. The fault lies entirely with the thief, not the house he robbed." He squeezed her hands tighter, the sheer authority of his presence filling the space between them. "David wants a legal war? Let him have it. But he has no idea what kind of terrain he just stepped onto. I have spent the last 10 years navigating the most ruthless corporate battlegrounds in Asia. You are not giving that man a single penny of your fortune, and you are not giving him a single shard of your soul. I am taking your case personally under my global firm. Starting tomorrow morning, your legacy belongs to the Lions." Dawn broke over Miami, exactly 2 weeks later, bringing with it a chilling reminder that David had no intention of slinking away into the night. Furious from the humiliation Min Woo's security team had dealt him on night one, David launched a vicious, calculated retaliation. Jewel was formally served with predatory divorce papers at her studio, demanding an outright 50% split of her entire liquid asset portfolio, ownership stake in her Florida property, and a staggering percentage of all future intellectual property and art royalties. But David's true malice wasn't confined to the courtroom. To force Jewel into a state of panic and manipulate her into a quiet, hasty settlement, David's attorney began orchestrating a coordinated character assassination. Within 48 hours, heavily twisted, venomous stories began flooding high society blogs and international art media outlets. Headline after headline painted a grotesque caricature of her life. The cost of creativity, international art icon accused of starving her marriage for fame. The articles weaponized her success, painting Jewel as a cold, elitist, and profoundly negligent wife who ruthlessly abandoned her lonely, ordinary husband to indulge in the glamorous high society lights of Paris and Tokyo. The strategy was designed to bleed her professionally. Jewel sat in her dark studio, watching her phone light up with frantic, escalating notifications. Her global art sponsors and premier gallery partners were beginning to panic under the sudden public relations nightmare, with 2 major European venues threatening to freeze her highly anticipated upcoming winter exhibitions until the scandal cleared. The walls were closing in, and David's camp was already celebrating, fully believing they had backed the wealthy artist into a corner where she would pay millions just to make the whispers stop. Right when David thought he had her exactly where he wanted her, the entire legal playing field violently shifted. Min Woo officially filled his formal notice of appearance as Jewel's lead counsel. He didn't just respond to David's local family lawyer, he utterly swallowed them. Utilizing the vast jurisdictional power of his international legal empire, Min Woo instantly filled an elite motion to transfer the entire case from the standard local county courts into the ultra-exclusive, high-stakes corporate branch of his global firm's federal division. David's low-tier local lawyers didn't even have time to process the shift before they were hit with a merciless, crushing avalanche of elite procedural demands, international discovery requests, and rigorous protective orders issued from the top-floor offices of a firm they weren't even qualified to cross paths with. Min Woo had completely paralyzed David's legal team in a single morning, sending a clear, terrifying message across the high-rises of Miami. The war of whispers was over, and the trial by fire had officially begun. The battleground shifted from the courtrooms of Miami to the hyper-modern, glass-walled corporate headquarters of Min Woo's global law firm. High above the city lights, the top-floor boardroom became an isolated sanctuary where time ceased to exist. For consecutive weeks, Jewel and Min Woo found themselves locked away until past midnight, surrounded by towering stacks of financial folders, international tax documents, household receipts, and bank statements from the entirety of her 1-year marriage. Min Woo's forensic legal team had unrolled a massive paper trail, and together they combed through every single dollar, tracking down the digital breadcrumbs David had left behind. But as the nights grew longer and the city below grew quieter, the forced proximity began to chip away at the heavy blocks of their 15-year emotional dam. The clinical, corporate atmosphere of the boardroom gradually softened, replaced by an intense, hyper-focused intimacy. The turning point came at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. They were leaning over a sprawling spreadsheet of international art gallery transactions when both reached for the same stack of audited bank statements. Their hands brushed. It was a simple, accidental contact, but a sudden electric shock seemed to ripple through the entire room, freezing them both in place. Jewel didn't pull her hand away, and neither did Min Woo. Jewel looked up, her breathing shallow from the sudden wave of raw, late-night vulnerability washing over her. "Sometimes I look at all these papers," she whispered, her voice barely carrying in the quiet room, "and I feel like my whole life was just an open vault for him to rob. I spent so long hiding how I felt from you, Min Woo. And then I chose someone who only saw me as a transaction." Min Woo's gaze darkened, the disciplined, unreadable mask of the elite global CEO finally slipping completely. He turned his hand, catching hers, his thumb tracing the back of her palm with an aching tenderness. "Do you have any idea what it was like for me?" Min Woo's voice dropped into a low, raw confession, thick with years of buried emotion. "Sitting in Seoul, watching you marry a man who didn't understand the first thing about the depth of your light, I forced myself to stay away because I thought he made you happy. I thought he gave you the peace I couldn't provide while I was fighting my father's corporate wars." He leaned closer, his dark eyes burning into hers. "Every day I spent in that boardroom in South Korea, I was thinking about you. I didn't expand this firm to America for the capital, Jewel. I expanded it to get back to you." The unresolved tension that had charged the air between them since their university days suddenly exploded, transforming the sterile boardroom into a magnetic field. Jewel saw the truth written clearly in his eyes. They were no longer just fighting a cutthroat legal battle against a greedy husband. They were actively dismantling 15 years of hesitation, reclaiming their stolen time and rewriting the true architecture of their hearts. The morning of the formal videotaped legal deposition arrived, transforming Min Woo's primary corporate boardroom into a cinematic arena of pure psychological warfare. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off the polished glass conference table and illuminating the unblinking lens of the video camera anchored at the end of the room. When the heavy glass doors swung open, David marched in, flanked by his aggressive chief counsel. He wore a sharp, tailored suit undoubtedly paid for by Jewel's hard work and a smug, arrogant smirk that practically radiated overconfidence. He genuinely believed that with the cameras rolling and his attorney ready to pounce, he could bully and intimidate Jewel into a massive multi-million-dollar surrender. David took his seat directly across from Jewel, adjusting his cuffs with an air of theatrical pity. When the deposition officially commenced, he launched into his rehearsed narrative, performing for the record with a nauseating level of drama. For nearly an hour, he confidently lied under oath, painting himself as the tragic victim of a wealthy, heartless celebrity. He spoke at length about how painfully abandoned and profoundly traumatized he had been while Jewel was overseas playing global superstar in Europe and Asia. He detailed manufactured lonely nights, falsely claiming that her heavy travel schedule had caused him such severe emotional distress that it utterly ruined his own career focus and fractured his mental well-being. Throughout the entire performance, Jewel sat perfectly still. She didn't flinch, she didn't interrupt, and she didn't grant him the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. Her back was straight, and her hands rested with absolute elegance on the smooth glass table, her composure reflecting the quiet dignity of a true master artist facing a cheap imitation. Beside her, Min Woo was a statue of pure, predatory patience. To David and his lawyer, Min Woo's silence looked like defeat. But in reality, it was the calculated stillness of a lion watching its prey step into a snare. Min Woo leaned back slightly in his leather chair, his dark eyes fixed on David with a chilling, unreadable focus. He intentionally allowed David's attorney to prompt lie after lie, letting David embellish his fabricated trauma on camera without a single objection. Every dramatic sigh David exhaled, every false accusation he levied against Jewel's character, and every inflated claim of marital neglect were being etched permanently into the official legal record. Min Woo sat in the eye of the storm, calmly watching David dig his own legal grave, waiting for the exact moment the trap would snap violently shut. The microphone captured every word of David's dramatic, fabricated testimony, the recording ticking away silently in the corner. David's attorney leaned back, an insufferable smirk plastered across his face as he looked at his watch, clearly believing they had secured a flawless multi-million-dollar leverage point. Then the trap snapped violently shut. Min-woo didn't yell. He didn't interrupt with a dramatic outburst. Instead, he calmly stood up, unbuttoning his tailored suit jacket with a terrifying rhythmic poise that instantly drained the warmth from the room. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a thick black leather forensic folder, and slid it smoothly across the glass table. It came to a sudden stop right in front of David's attorney. "Mr. Vance," Min-woo murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the room like a frozen blade. "You have spent the last hour documenting my client's absence from her home. Now, let us document what you were doing while she was away building the fortune you so desperately crave." With cold, merciless precision, Min-woo began laying out a massive, devastating corporate countersuit that completely blindsided the defense. He opened the folder to reveal forensic financial tracking sheets, geolocation tags, and itemized statements. While Jewel was traveling the world, enduring grueling exhibition schedules in Paris and Tokyo, David hadn't been a lonely, abandoned husband. He had been actively draining their joint household credit lines to fund a high-rise luxury apartment, exotic vacations, and a lavish lifestyle for his junior clerk mistress. David's smirk instantly froze. His attorney frantically began flipping through the papers, his hands visibly shaking as the ironclad evidence stared back at him. But Min-woo wasn't done. He was just getting started. "But marital waste is the least of your concerns, David," Min-woo continued, his gaze locking onto his prey. He reached back into his briefcase and produced the ultimate fatal blow, a stack of certified subpoenaed corporate records bearing the official seal of David's mid-level employer. "3 months ago, your company's internal audit flagged a discrepancy," Min-woo revealed, his voice steady and lethal. "You weren't working late, David. You were quietly embezzling corporate funds to keep up appearances. And when they caught you, they fired you on the spot. You didn't launch this divorce because you felt neglected. You launched it as a predatory extortion scheme, targeting your wife's art empire because you desperately needed millions to pay back the stolen money and escape a federal prison sentence." The courtroom went completely, utterly silent. David's attorney turned a ghost-like shade of pale. He dropped the papers, grabbed David's arm, and fiercely hissed into his ear, advising his client to shut his mouth. But David had completely lost his mind. Cornered, exposed, and ruined, he violently threw his chair backward. It crashed against the floor as he lunged forward, his face contorted in a mask of pure, ugly rage. He began screaming aggressively, hurling venomous insults directly at Jewel, his fists clenched as he tried to bridge the distance across the table. He never even made it halfway. Min-woo moved with an explosive, fluid speed, instantly stepping directly into David's space. His towering frame completely shielded Jewel from view, a stone wall of pure protective fury. Before David could take another step, the heavy boardroom doors flew open and 4 burly corporate security detail members moved in, tackling David to the ground and locking his arms behind his back. Jewel sat safely behind Min-woo, her heart hammering, but her mind entirely at peace as she watched her nightmare finally disintegrate. The corporate battle did not drag out. Faced with the terrifying prospect of a federal prison sentence and a total public exposure of his embezzlement, David completely fractured. He signed a pristine total surrender divorce agreement, relinquishing every single claim to Jewel's wealth, her property, and her intellectual property. He walked away with absolute zero, his name wiped clean from her life just as the state authorities moved in to process his immediate corporate criminal prosecution. 6 months later, the suffocating shadows of the legal war had completely evaporated, replaced by the brilliant, flashing lights of a high-society luxury gallery in the heart of Miami. Jewel was hosting her most triumphant, record-breaking international art exhibition to date. The elite of the art world, wealthy collectors, and high-profile curators packed the room, whispering in awe at the sheer brilliance of the collection. Jewel's reputation was not only pristine, it was untouchable. Her brand was more powerful than ever, her massive fortune fully insulated, and her creative spirit entirely liberated. At the absolute center of the gallery, illuminated by a soft, dramatic spotlight, hung her grandest masterpiece. It was a sweeping, emotionally raw abstract canvas featuring deep greens and vibrant florals of a shared childhood garden, melting seamlessly into a blinding golden sunrise. It was the visual story of her survival, her reclamation, and the man who had stood by her side through the fire. Minwoo stood alone in front of the painting, dressed in a flawless, tailored tuxedo, quietly admiring the strokes of her genius. The cold, unyielding aura of the global CEO had completely softened as he stared at the canvas. Jewel walked up behind him, her elegant evening gown sweeping across the polished floor. She didn't hesitate. She slipped her arm securely into his, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I finally figured it out, you know," she whispered, her voice a soft, intimate melody that easily cut through the ambient chatter of the crowd. "I know you never saw me as just a younger sister, Min. I know you were just waiting until you could protect me completely." Minwoo turned to face her, his dark eyes burning with a deep, consuming warmth that had been kept under lock and key for over 15 years. He didn't speak a word. Instead, he pulled her firmly into his space, his hand resting securely against the small of her back. Beneath the radiant glow of her masterpiece, he leaned down and kissed her deeply. A silent, unshakable vow to spend the rest of his life protecting her light, her heart, and her genius. The high society crowd erupted into elegant applause, celebrating the beautiful union of the celebrated artist and the powerful global mogul. But as Jewel smiled against his lips, a sharp buzz cut through the moment. Inside Minwoo's tuxedo pocket, his phone vibrated with a high-priority, encrypted alert directly from his Seoul headquarters. Minwoo subtly pulled the device out, his eyes narrowing as he read the secure text message. David's mistress had just officially offered to turn state's evidence in exchange for a lighter sentence. She had just revealed a chilling final truth: David hadn't acted alone. There was a secret, immensely wealthy accomplice embedded deep within the international art world who had originally fed David all of Jewel's travel logs and financial inside information to systematically target her fortune. Minwoo quietly locked his phone, his face hardening into a mask of pure, lethal determination as he looked back down at his beautiful partner. The war wasn't over.